Welcome back to the Vault of Silliness, or should I say, Vault of Clippiness. Yes, the clipping at the end of the episodes continues, and the powers that be are fighting the good fight to resolve it properly. But, for now, we have agreed to try a little trickery, a bit of video voodoo, some audio abracadabra. What is it? Well, thank you just so darn much for asking. I will add around 30 seconds of silence at the end of each show. The hope is that it will now clip off the added silence, and my wonderfully entertaining close to each show will be heard in its entirety. I'm sure some of you are saying, he should add the silence at the start of his close. All right, wise guys. So, this will be our test episode for that procedure. Let us venture back to February 25th, 1996, for a Norm Nathan show that I have titled, Wolves at the Studio Door. We have 3 guests, all of whom will be speaking about the wolf. Guest number 1 is Fred Keating from Loci Clan Wolf Refuge in Conway, New Hampshire, a shelter for wolf hybrids. Those are wolves mixed with the domesticated dog. He provides excellent info on wolves and their abilities, explains all his refuge does, and what started him on this journey. Guest number 2 is Paul Safran from the North American Wolf Foundation in Wolf Hollow in Ipswich, Mass. At the time, he had 17 100% pure British Columbian timber wolves, and they were howling in the background. He tells us about the horribly senseless and cruel ways the wolf was treated and exterminated in the past, and how governments are trying to right those wrongs. And of course, he talks about his foundation, his experiences, and the presentations he and his wife Joni do at Wolf Hollow. Guest number 3, Rick McIntyre, author of War Against the Wolf. He adds even more perspective on the anti-wolf mindset of the time, and now, thankfully, a change in attitudes and philosophy about the wolf and its importance in the environment. We do take some calls with Rick. We begin with Joe from Quincy, and then Paul Safran returns to speak with Rick. That first call from Joe prompts a great discussion, and Paul talks more about understanding the wolf and how he interacts with them. We continue with Jim in Georgetown, John from Michigan, Barbara in Brookline, Pauline from Westboro, Bruce in Boston, and Pat from Plainville. Episode 127, Wolves at the Studio Door, howls its way to your ears. Now.
The owner and operator of, is it Loki? Is that the way you pronounce that, Fred?
Loci.
Loci. That sounds more wolf-like.
Well, it's a little sharper.
Yeah, Loci Clan Wolf Refuge up in Conway, New Hampshire. I'm told it's a shelter for wolf hybrids, that is wolves and a domesticated dog mix. And you run it on your own land.
Right.
And all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I could tell more about you, but I'd rather hear you talk about that. For the next couple hours, as a matter of fact, we'll be talking about wolves. Basically, I wonder, do you all know each other? Do you know Paul Safran of the founder director of the North American Wolf Foundation up in Ipswich?
Yes.
And Rick McIntyre, who's written a book called War Against the Wolf.
I've heard of Rick. I haven't read that book yet, though.
Okay. But the wolf has such a bad name. In a sense, usually from people who have no idea what a wolf even is. But, you know, the big bad wolf and Little Red Riding Hood who met the wicked wolf. Or did she meet a fox? I get them mixed up. That kind of stuff. And I know that later on when we talk to Rick McIntyre, he'll be talking about the campaign to exterminate the wolves that has been conducted even by our government for hundreds of years, and how unfair that all of that is. Anyway, tell me about your part of it, because you're talking about wolves that are mixed with domesticated dogs.
Right. For a long time now, for well over 50 years, there's been a program of mixing the wild wolf with the domestic dog to create an animal called a wolf hybrid, which is actually a misnomer. It's correctly called a wolf-dog cross. But what happens with the crossing of them, sometimes you get an animal that has more dog in it, sometimes you get more wolf in it. I found that the more dog you get in it, the more dangerous it is.
Is that right? Most people would think just the opposite.
No, the wolf in the wild is basically a pacifist. It's a non-aggressive animal, not want to have anything to do with people at all. In fact, there has never been a documented account of a healthy wolf attacking a human being, ever.
Now, why would anybody then mix a wolf with a dog? Is that so? Somebody who feels that they're terribly macho can own a dog that has wolf blood in him, or why would you do that?
Well, for people who understand the wolf, you want to get into the society of the wolf is very complex. Plus, a wolf's very intelligent.
Much more intelligent than dogs, from what I gather.
Yes. They're on a par with, say, an 11 or 12-year-old child, intelligence-wise, and whereas a dog is basically a 3-month-old puppy forever.
Kind of a little stupid thing.
Yeah,
Is that what
well,
you're saying?
Man has bred the dog down to work, and in order to do that, you had to get rid of the brain.
Isn't that awful? Isn't that awful? I'd say I've never had a wolf hybrid. I've obviously, like most people, I've got dogs, and 2 of them at the moment. And now when I look at them, I'm going to think, boy, you're stupid. We bred you down to remove your brain or to diminish its intelligence. They'll never talk to me again. I know they never will.
Well, the wolf society is very similar to the way the American Indians lived. It's a nomadic society, a small group of anywhere from 2 to 24, 25 animals working as a group for survival.
Okay, again, let me ask you now, why would you breed a wolf and a dog together? Why not just leave the wolf as a wolf and leave the dog as a dog? Why does anybody do the mix the 2?
Well, it's very hard to domesticate the wolf, and if you want to have anything to do with that type of an intelligent animal, you have to mix in a little bit of dog so that it will accept being around humans.
Okay, you mix in a little bit of dog so he'll come home at night or something like that.
Yes.
But I mean, if you want to do that, why not just have a dog? Why not and let wolves by themselves? It seems it's kind of like domesticating a lion or something. There doesn't seem any point to all of that. But in any event, tell me about your group, the Loci Clan Wolf Refuge. How did you get into that, and how did you get involved with this whole thing to a point where you want to protect this wolf-dog mix?
Well, it started a long time ago. I've been fascinated by wolves for a long time. I did 10 years worth of study before I ever saw one, and they're just fascinating animals, and somehow I managed to get my hands on one accidentally, and found out what a beautiful animal it was and how intelligent it was, and it was something that I felt that I could share with other people, so I started breeding. And about 6 years into breeding, I realized that there weren't enough people out there that were willing to do the education involved in having one of these animals, so I got out of breeding.
When you talk about breeding, you're talking about breeding a wolf with a dog?
Well, what I had was 2 high-percentage hybrids. And what I did is I bred those, which gave me a fairly standard high-percentage hybrid.
Okay, so this was a mix right from the very beginning.
Right from the beginning, right. I'd never owned a 100% animal at that time.
I see.
And what I found is that people buy them for the wrong reasons. They do think they are a macho animal, that they would be good for protection and things like that, and they're not.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of your flyers and things that they don't bark or anything, so they're not. You'd be better to get what you said, a Rottweiler or something like that.
If you want something for protection, you ought to get a dog that is basically bred for protection. A wolf or a high-percentage wolf hybrid will run away from a stranger. They won't have anything to do with them.
Okay, so obviously they're not going to offer you a great deal of protection then.
No.
Now what do you do at the Loci Clan Wolf Refuge? You have a lot of these hybrid?
I have 28 right now. And
what kind of a future do they have? Do you just keep them there and keep them away from people, or do the people take them eventually and
No.
bring them to their homes, or what?
No. What I do is I provide a home for unwanted animals that people have bought thinking they were going to get a dog, and finding out, a year and a half, 2 years into it, that they've got a very intelligent animal that they haven't got a clue of how to live with. So I provide a safe haven for them to live out their lives with their own kind. They live in pack situations very much like they do in the wild, except that they're in large pens.
Okay, so some people who have these animals don't realize, they think they're dogs.
Right.
They're right, and they don't realize there's a big chunk of wolf in them.
Well, they like the idea of the wolf, and they think that because a wolf and a dog look very similar, that they're going to be able to train it like a dog. And wolves are not really trainable to the point that people want a dog to behave. Like, it won't sit when it's told. It won't come when it's called. And it won't do all the little tricks that it's supposed to do.
It sounds like my dogs, which are that's because they haven't been trained all that well by me. But no, I know what you're saying. And do the people get to a point where they realize that it's not a dog they have? They're not totally a dog then, isn't it?
Right.
It's a wolves, and they come to you saying, help me.
Well, first, usually what happens is they go to a shelter, a local town shelter or a state shelter, a humane society shelter, and find out that the animal will be killed immediately. All of the shelters in the area of New England have been told by the Humane Society and by the state governments to kill these animals immediately.
Oh, gee.
And it's basically because of ignorance. They don't think they can be adopted out, and in some aspects I agree with them. The animal needs special care, it needs special areas to live, and it needs somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I guess that's true of every animal, but
right, every animal is a special needs animal.
Yeah, but particularly when you're talking about this combination wolf and dog mix, because this is the kind of animal that most people don't come across. And when they do, maybe they don't even know they've got one, or if they do know that, they don't quite know how to handle them. Now, what do you do with these animals when you have them? You save them from euthanasia, from being killed, which is really, I really appreciate that very much. And what, you I know you accept donations from people and all that, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit for people who want to donate and keep these animals alive and well protected and all that kind of stuff. But what do you do when you get them? Just keep them for the rest of their lives?
Yes. There is no finding a new home for them, because that would just be perpetuating the problem that they started with. There aren't enough qualified people out there to have these animals. And they also need companionship on a 24-hour-a-day basis, and most people can't provide that. And they don't want to have 2 or 3 or 4 animals around their place that don't respond the way they expected a dog to respond.
Okay, now you have a lot of these animals there, these hybrids.
Right.
Do they get along with each other okay?
There are certain members that get along, and there are others that, because they are wolf-like, they have a society rule to follow, which is every pack has to have an alpha male and an alpha female.
Now, what does that mean?
Alpha male and alpha female are, number one, they're the bosses. They run the pack. They tell the others how to live their life, basically. It's a pecking order society. And you have second-in-commands called betas, which will help out the alphas when in need. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to take over if anything happens. Earning the alpha spot is a tough row to hoe, because it's done through intelligence and strength. You have to fight for that spot. And in fighting for the spot, you also, when you get new animals coming in, you've got animals that have already thought that they were alpha, and you put them in with another alpha, there's an immediate fight. So I try to avoid that by introducing new animals to the outside of a group of pens to see which pens they're going to be able to go into, and then put them in and see how it's going to work out. If it's going to be a war, then I'll try another pen.
Do people come and visit just to look and see what these animals look like? Do you have many of those?
We're open to the public so that people can see how the animals interact with each other, and they're allowed to touch them. And I would say of the 28 animals that are here, I've only got 2 animals that I'm a little cautious with. Every other animal is very, very gentle. They've learned that this is a safe place. They have nothing to fear from humans.
Okay, now where in Conway, New Hampshire are you? How would people find you?
Just off Route 302 in Center Conway on Old Mill Road.
Okay, Center Conway, 302 Center Conway. Or Route 302, you say?
Yep.
Center Conway off Mill Road. Okay, that's actually not too far from this area. You're heading up into the White Mountains. That's pretty.
No, it's about 2.5 hours out of Boston.
Yeah, it's pretty country up there.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I'm from south of Boston originally. And,
are you? You're from the South Shore?
Yeah, from Hingham.
And some of those folks who knew you back in Hingham would say, "Hey, what is that Fred Keating doing up there?"
I
in
think
Center Conway, they would be amazed dealing with, in a Loci clan wolf refuge. I didn't expect he'd be there. I'd see him in the general store in Hingham, and what's he doing up there anyway? That's wild. So that's a fascinating story anyway. And how long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this for 8 years now. Like I said, I used to be a breeder before that, and before that I was just studying. So I've got a few years under my belt on it, but just taking in animals and giving them a place to stay has been about 8 years.
I think what you're doing is a lovely thing, but are there many who are doing the same thing as you're doing throughout the country with a mixture of wolf and dog?
As I'm finding out, there are quite a few refuges around. Wolf Park started off that way, and now they're doing mainly just wolves. Wolf Haven in Washington started out as a refuge for wolf hybrids, and now they're doing just wolves. But there's a lot of little places around California, New Mexico, and Arizona that are doing it.
Okay, because as you know, as we mentioned, as the next hour and a half go by, we'll be talking with people primarily about the pure wolves, that is those that are not mixed with dogs.
Right.
And the fact that at one time, ranchers would say, boy, these wolves are coming in and destroying my sheep and all that kind of stuff. Let's eradicate them. Let's get rid of them. And I hope that the pendulum is swung the other way, where we say there are some that might do that, but we don't have to wipe out all of them. Some of them who live in the wilds who don't cause problems. And all that, and they're lovely animals, and they're obviously put on Earth for some reason. Tell me about now the Loci Clan Wolf Refuge. I know you would not object if people decided to send a contribution to you. So,
oh, not at all. That's how we survive.
Tell us how they do that.
Send us a check, or call us, or come visit. We're easy to find.
Okay, and the address is Loci, L-O-K-I, Clan, Loci Clan Wolf Refuge, Post Office Box 1186. Am I doing this right?
You are.
Okay, Post Office Box 1186, Conway, New Hampshire, 03818, 03818. And it's not as though you have a place where that there's another step forward for these animals, that they're going to stay with you for the rest of their lives, which is how long, huh? What is their lifespan?
They've been known, if kept absolutely healthy, to go 17 years.
Okay, that's pretty much like a relative or a smaller dog. I have big ones, the Newfoundlands I had St. Bernards, and their lifespan is about 8 or 9 years or 10 years, I think, at the most. They don't have long ones.
Well, that's because they get heavy and their hearts can't take it.
Yeah. Their body is kind of out of proportion to what the hearts can stand.
Right.
Yeah? Okay. Okay, that's Lokai Clan Wolf Refuge. If you didn't get all this, you know when you listen to us, just send me a note and I'll send you the information. Too, in case you don't have a pencil or you're lying in the dark or something in bed. Lokai Clan Wolf Refuge, Post Office Box 1186, Conway, New Hampshire. That's kind of interesting. This is an area that I think most of us are totally unaware of, but I think obviously we're more aware of it now as a result of you coming on the program with us, Fred Keating, and I really appreciate that. And good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
You have a nice feeling when you get up in the morning, you know that you've saved some more of these animals. And there they are, kind of did they look at you with gratitude, or do they not much care?
I think they care.
That was a stupid
They're all
question.
very friendly and happy to see me when I come out in the morning. Of course, they're my alarm clock. They sound off at 5:30 in the morning.
What do they sound like? You said they don't bark like a watchdog would bark.
Well, they do bark. It's part of their language, but they don't bark at intruders like a dog does.
Oh, I see. Does the bark sound like a dog's bark?
Oh, yes. All dogs came from wolves, so the vocal cords are very similar. There are some dogs that howl like wolves, so it's just something that's been lost in some dogs.
Okay. That's absolutely fascinating. Fred Keating, thanks a million, and best wishes to you. And founder and director of the North American Wolf Foundation and Wolf Hollow, which is up in Ipswich. And we're going to learn more about wolves than maybe you ever thought you'd care to know, but I think fascinating stuff. The wolf mixed with the dog. And interesting, the fact that the dog is more vicious than the wolf and not as bright. And we'll learn more about the pure wolves in the next hour and a half. American Wolf Foundation and Wolf Hollow, and that, like Lokai, the Lokai Clan Wolf Refuge is here in New England, and that's even closer, though, for those of you who live in the Boston area. This is up in Ipswich. And I'm glad to talk with you. How you doing, Paul?
Yes.
Yes, hi. Hi, you're on WBZ, and I'm glad that you're excited about that.
Yes, I am very much so. I want to help the wolf any way I can, and I really appreciate you calling me and let me know I'm helping out.
No, you are helping out.
Would you like to hear the wolves?
Yeah, I can hear something in the background. What is that?
They started howling.
Oh, yeah, can you hold the phone up so we can hear that? That's... how many wolves are there, Paul?
What you're listening to now is 17 100% pure British Columbian timber wolves.
Okay, so we're off the kind of stuff that Fred Keating raises or takes care of, the combination of wolf and dog.
Yes.
And he was saying that the wolf is much more intelligent than the dog. That in the wild, I mean, they don't attack people. They're fairly peaceful animals. Is that also?
Well, it all depends on the situation.
Now, what's the situation? For example, I mean, most not only animals but people will attack if they're being attacked, or if somebody they love is being attacked. They'll fight back. But we're told that a lot of animals won't just attack for no reason at all. That only humans do that. Is that fairly close, or is that just a myth?
No, that's very true. And the wolf is actually 10 times smarter than the smartest dog. That has been decided upon by some of the world's top environmentalists and animal experts.
Okay, because the wolf has such a terrible reputation, as we were mentioning earlier. You know, who's afraid of the big bad wolf, and the wolf meeting Red Riding Hood, and of course we use the term wolf for a human being who's lecherous. What aren't you a wolf? You know, that kind of stuff. Obviously, the wolf doesn't deserve all of that.
Exactly, the wolf does not deserve it at all. The only reason the wolf has a bad reputation is because people that hated the wolf because the wolf was going to possibly cost them money. that is the reason why the wolf has been so badly treated by mankind.
Okay, when you say the wolf was at the cost of money, you mean in what way? Attacking their cattle or sheep?
Yes, that's one of the main reasons. The wolf was exterminated in Europe hundreds of years ago. In Ipswich, Massachusetts, the town I live in, there was a bounty on wolves in 1637 when the English government still ran this country. And everybody in this town had to kill wolves. They were paid for it, had a bounty on them, and they were given by the English government at that time. They were given fish hooks that were put together in a combination, and these fish hooks were dipped into fat, and then you'd have a nice hard ball of fat that was thrown out and scattered around all the woods here in Ipswich. And wolves, especially young wolves, when they see something that smells good to eat, they'll rush in to grab it, and because of the competition of who's going to get it to eat, instead of chewing it, knowing the fish hooks would be in there, whoever got there first would take it up in their mouth and swallow it quickly, and then the fat would dissolve in their stomach, and then the fish hooks would definitely, get into their intestines or into their stomach, and the animal would die a very slow, torturous death. And also, all families in the town of Ipswich at one time were required to have a bull mastiff dog, which was, a very large dog. And these dogs were used to kill wolves, especially young wolves like puppies and so forth. They would be brought to den sites and let go into the den, and they would go in and wipe out a whole litter of puppies and so forth.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking with Rick McIntyre in a little bit, who's written a book called "The War Against the Wolf: America's Campaign to Exterminate the Wolf." Very much the kind of thing that you're talking about. And the fact that it was, because you mentioned the British government, it was certainly the American government also later on wanted to get rid of the wolves, and the ranchers got together and said, they're attacking our sheep and all of that, and they want to wipe out every wolf they could see, even those that were not doing the attacking, from what I gather. So that was kind of ugly. And you mentioned one way in which they killed them with those fish hooks, which sounds simply awful. It's hard to imagine man's inhumanity, certainly against man, but against animal like that. And they would poison them, would they not? And there were numbers of other ways they would they just wanted to get rid of every wolf that ever existed, and that seemed senseless. Have we reversed that at all?
Yes, now there's a lot of places in the world that are trying to restore the wolf because they have decided that it is the worst thing that the American government has ever done as far as the environment is concerned, is to wipe out the wolf in this country. And many English companies, many European companies have also decided the same thing. I had a gentleman here today at Wolf Hollow from England, and what they're trying to do now over in Scotland is get the wolf back into Scotland because of the overpopulation of many plant-eating animals, such as, deer and so forth. And it's damaging the environment because there's no way to control these animals other than hunting, and in many areas they can't be hunted, and mankind does not have the senses to actually do the job that the wolf does, because the wolf is an animal that goes after things that show weak infirmities, and by doing this, the wolf is actually very beneficial to the animals it hunts because it will spend much time trying to find a animal that is showing weak signs, and this is the animal the wolves will normally go after. I'm talking about large animals such as deer and moose and caribou and so forth. And by taking these weak and firm animals out of the herd, it is actually benefiting the herd because it stops those animals from breeding and producing more infirm animals. And it is mankind who thought he was going to take over the job as being a predator in this country does not have the senses to find and discover a weak prey animal. But wolves have the ability, because of their acute senses, that they can tell which animal in the herd is not healthy. And this is very beneficial to the herd, and mankind does not want to go out and hunt animals that it doesn't think is healthy, and nobody wants to eat something that isn't, healthy.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe infected and pass a disease along to them or something.
Exactly.
And Paul, now you, as founder and director of the North American Wolf Foundation,
yes,
it's not the kind of thing you learn in school. Nobody says, what kind of career do you want to go into? I want to take care of wolves and establish a place. Maybe I'll call it Wolf Hollow. How do you get involved in this kind of thing?
Well, I've been involved with wolves from a young child. My mother was a wild animal lover, and she was also an artist, and one of the first paintings she ever did in her life was a picture of a wolf on top of a hill looking down at a little village of people. And I found this picture in my attic when I was only about 8 years old, and that caused me to be interested in the wolf. And as time went by, I picked up some skills of being an artist like my mother. And when I was in the first grade, I spent a lot of time during the class I would be drawing wolves and Native Americans because of the relationship between the two. So my mother got a letter when I was in the first grade, and from the first grade teacher, and it said that if your son Paul does not stop drawing pictures of wolves and Native Americans, he is not going to make it into the second grade because he doesn't pay attention. So it goes way back then. I'm 53 years old now, and starting in 1969, I had my first 100% pure wolf. And
how did you get that?
I got that wolf by getting in contact with a person in this country that gave me the animal because I wanted to help the wolf. And I got it as a puppy at 10 days old, which must be done if you have to bond with them at a very young age before their sight gets good. Their eyes start to open at 10 days of age, and they start seeing good at about 15 days old. So you have to get them used to the sound of your voice and the scent of your body and your touch and the way you handle them, so they feel secure around you at a very young age before they open their eyes. And because if they can see well, they will be afraid of you right off. But where they can't see well at a young age, like 10 days old, then they get to know that the scent of your body and the touch of your hands and the sound of your voice is safe, and is also being very affectionate with them. So when they get to see well, then they also feel safe with you because you have been nice to them, and your sound, your scent, and so forth, and the way you handle them has been kind and been very, very affectionate to them, like their mother was.
What about Wolf Hollow itself? Where you said how many wolves do you have there now?
I have 17 pure wolves here.
17 pure wolves. And what's the idea of Wolf Hollow? Is it well, I guess I can end the question right there. What is the idea of that?
Yes, Wolf Hollow is, the North American Wolf Foundation is something I founded back in 1988, and it's a state and federally licensed educational facility. What we're trying to do here is save the wolf in the wild by exposure and education to people that come here and visit. On weekends, we're open to the public, and weekdays we do groups by reservation. That's when the schools come here and so forth. And people get to see the wolves during the presentation, which involves myself and my wife, Joni, being in the enclosure with the wolves. And people are in the outside in an observation area, and it's behind double chain link fencing, which is part of the federal rules. And they get to see the wolves all during the presentation, and my wife does the verbal part of the presentation, and she does very well at that. And I interact with the wolves because I've been working with wolves hands-on for many years, and to me it's my happiest time of the day for me. And I know how to provoke situations which most people would think would be very dangerous, but I know how to unprovoke those things that I do, so I can limit the amount of aggression the wolf is going to show. And the wolves are very testy animals. They will test something they think has a weakness in it, and if it shows that it is going to be submissive, and I'm talking about people, so.
No, but it's kind of interesting because you're talking about how intelligent wolves are, so they can spot things that maybe some people can't even spot.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and how do you get to marry somebody who's interested in wolves? When you were going with your wife, you said her name is Joan?
Joni, yes.
Joni. Okay, now how does when you were courting Joni, if I may use an old-fashioned term, and she knew you were interested in wolves, I would think that would turn most women off. But you found at least one woman who was not turned off by that, but works with you?
Yes. She does very well at it, and well, there was a few years where I didn't have any pure wolves here, and Joni and I got married back in 1975, and that's when I found out that the wolf in North America was basically down to a minimum, and they were still being killed off, and they would soon be extinct. So that's when I decided to do something about it by starting Wolf Hall of North American Wolf Foundation, and I got licensed by the federal government in 1988, and I got my pure wolves, and that was with the help of Dr. Eric Klinghammer, who runs Wolf Park out in Battleground, Indiana. And he is the one that directed me to the correct people so I could get some pure wolves. And the first wolves I got, we had started off with 5 100% pure British Columbian timber wolves, and the males and females are not related, and they were all 10 days old when I got them. So I brought them here, and this is after I had the enclosure built and so forth, and had my federal licenses and all that. And I am a non-profit facility.
Okay, now where are you in Ipswich?
We are located on Route 133 in Ipswich.
Okay, that's
come to Ipswich and take 133 East, which goes towards Essex and Gloucester. We're about 3 miles from downtown Ipswich.
Okay, I know just about where that is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you mentioned your nonprofit group, so if people want to send donations to what would they make it out to North American Wolf Foundation?
Yes.
And send it to what's the rest of the address?
114 Essex Road, ESSEX.
Okay, 114 Essex Road. Are you near the old Cable Hospital?
Yes, it's just down the street from me on Route 133 and 1A where the junction is.
Okay, what is the zip in Ipswich?
01938.
Okay. And what if people want to come up? You mentioned a lot of school kids and all that. They come up and you give a talk on wolves and that kind of stuff.
Yes, it's a 1-hour lecture.
Okay, now what do they do? Just to call you at what number if they want to arrange a visit, or just drop by, or what? How does it work?
Well, on the weekends that's when we're open to the public. Saturdays and Sundays year round, weather permitting, as long as it's not raining badly. We open every weekend. Now during the weekdays we take groups by reservation of 20 more.
Okay.
And that's when schools come here, and scouts or any group of 20 or more. And we also combine groups. If people can't get 20 people together, we'll get like a group of 10, another group of 10 or something like that. And people come here and they go to the outside observation area, and they have a bench. I have a bench out there where people can sit down for their 1-hour presentation, and myself, my wife, like I said before, go into the enclosure, and she does the verbal part of the presentation, which she does very well at, and I interact and interplay with the wolves while she's doing the presentation.
that the word?
Yes, I was like...
You're groping for the word nutty.
Yes,
Okay.
I didn't know the correct word to use, but they do think I'm crazy, some of the things I do with the wolves.
Okay, can I give you your phone number? Is that the same number I just gave? That is not I just gave, but what we used to call you?
Yes.
That's 508, of course, is the area code up the Ipswich, and it's 356-0216.
Correct.
That's okay for them to call that number, 356-0216. I think that would be a great excursion for them, as it has been, I know, for a lot of people.
Well, it's a lot of people are really very intrigued by when they come here, and they fall in love with the wolves by the time they leave. Not because the wolves, nobody gets to touch the wolves that comes here. I mean, they're very afraid of people, and especially strangers. So, but they're bonded with myself and my wife and some of the volunteers that come here to help us out. And they, people, when they learn about what the wolf is really all about, and my wife doing the verbal part of the presentation and myself interacting with the wolves, they learn that the wolf is not an aggressive, vicious animal, and it is not an animal that is an opportunist with people as it is with animals, like I was telling you before about weak and firm prey.
Right. Now, do you go out with like a slideshow or anything like that? Would you give or you have your wife give a talk away from where you are?
No, we don't, because I don't think that people will be affected the same way as when they see it happening right in front of them with real live wolves.
Right there. Okay, well, I got to get going because we have news coming up. But you're an interesting man, Paul Safran, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking. The latest one is called War Against the Wolf, America's Campaign to Exterminate the Wolf. And we'll bring back a little bit later on Paul Safran, who founded the North American Wolf Foundation, who has Wolf Hollow up in Ipswich, and Paul Safran, who'd like to talk with him also. Rick McIntyre, author of the book War Against the Wolf, America's Campaign to Exterminate the Wolf. And you're from the Boston area or Massachusetts too, are you, Rick?
That's right, Norm. I was born in Lowell, and then until I was 10, lived in Billerica. Then we moved to Framingham and went to high school there. And during the 60s, WBZ was the station I listened to for rock and roll, so I'm very familiar with your station. And then went to school out at UMass in Amherst. So I spent, I guess, probably the first 25 years of my life in Massachusetts.
And now you're where? Are you at Yellowstone? You're working as a ranger at Yellowstone National Park?
Well, right now I'm in West Texas at Big Bend National Park. I work here in the desert during the winter months and then in Yellowstone during the summer. So I'll be back in Yellowstone by May.
Okay, now what got you, as a kid in Framingham and Billerica and all these exotic places, what got you so interested in wolves?
Well, I think originally it probably all started with reading Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I visited Walden Pond quite a bit in Concord and was really impressed with his philosophy and his love for the outdoors. That influenced me to major in forestry at UMass, and then that led to jobs with both the U.S. Forest Service, starting in New Hampshire, then eventually out west. So I've been working as a park ranger out west for about 21 years. And one of the first jobs I had out west was in Alaska in Denali National Park, a place where I got to see wolves in the wild all the time, had about 500 wolf sightings while I was up there.
And the book, incidentally, is just absolutely fascinating. It's a subject that I would guess a lot of people have never really thought about too deeply, and yet you can really get into it. Of course, you can't hear us where you are, but the first half hour we had a man from Ipswich who has a place called the Lokai Clan Wolf Refuge.
Yes,
which is a combination of he takes care of hybrids, dogs and wolves combinations. And Paul Safran, who'll be with us in a while because he wants to talk to you too. He's the founder and director of the North American Wolf Foundation. So this whole 2 hours is all about wolves. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a subject people don't know about except who's afraid of the big bad wolf and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. Your book war against wolf indicates that there was government support behind the idea of getting rid of just about every wolf that ever existed on the face of the earth, and they were quite successful in that.
Yeah, and it all started right in the Boston area. The purpose of my book was to show people that historic development of attitudes toward the wolves, and I started right at the very beginning. One of the first things that the colonists did, this was back in 1630, was to offer a cash bounty for anybody in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Anybody that killed a wolf turned it in and got a cash reward. In fact, during those early days in the 1600s, if you did kill a wolf in Massachusetts, the reward in cash was roughly the same as a month's wages. So there was a tremendous incentive to kill them off. Even the colony in what is now known as New York City had a cash bounty on wolves. So it started during the very first days of colonization, and then continued on to the point where in 1915 there was a big debate in Congress over whether or not the federal government should underwrite a national wolf extermination program in the lower 48 states. They passed that bill, and so starting in 1915 and for many years afterwards, large amounts of federal taxpayers' money was spent to kill them off.
Now, and you get pretty graphic about the ways people killed them off. Either, obviously shooting is the obvious one, but also poisoning and
yes,
hooks and all kinds of awful things. Like the wolf was our worst enemy in the entire world. Well, of course, a lot of ranchers probably would say that's so because they'd see wolves attacking their sheep and all of that.
Yes.
Why should we protect the wolves? Why is this extermination of the wolves wrong?
Well, I think an important point to understand historically, and this was another reason I did the book, I discovered that even the most anti-wolf people in the 1800s freely admitted that the problem, the conflict between the ranchers and the wolves, had been caused by the near extermination of the game animals out west. There used to be as many as 65 million bison out here in the early 1800s and millions of deer and elk. But by the late 1800s, almost all those animals had been killed off. So the wolves that used to depend on that natural wild prey, many of them starved to death. They just couldn't survive that change. Some of the wolves were smart enough to figure out that there was one alternative to starvation, and that was going after the livestock. So it was understandable in the late 1800s what was happening. The wolves had little choice. It was either livestock or starvation. And if we were all ranchers out here in West Texas at that time trying to support our family through the livestock industry, if the wolves were coming after our stock, it's understandable that we'd want to kill them off. But all that was a result, all that conflict was a direct result of the killing of so many millions and millions of the prey animals. So that's what really set things up.
Okay, but you also mentioned in the book the fact that the extermination spread to what wanted to take into effect the fact that we ought to kill all wolves,
yes.
even those in the wild who really did not attack animals. A lot of wolves do not.
Yes, and Norm, probably the best example of that would be Yellowstone National Park, a place that was really set up as a wildlife sanctuary, but even there the wolves were killed by park rangers. I spent a lot of time going through the Yellowstone archives and then reprinted a lot of the Park Service reports that documents that it was park rangers on government payroll that were going out there and killing them. It was just a national obsession. Maybe in some ways it's almost like some of the ethnic cleansing wars that are taking place in Europe right now. It's very hard to be logical or rational about these things, but at the time, virtually every single person agreed. In fact, probably the earliest person that I discovered that objected to it was Thoreau back in 1856. As far as I can tell, he was the very first person that was bemoaning the fact that wolves had been killed off in Massachusetts. So, like in many other things, he was way ahead of his time.
Now, have we taken another tack now? Are we trying to save the wolves? Are we trying to reintroduce them? And
yes.
why would we be doing that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think during the height of the environmental movement in the late 60s and the early 70s, that's when I was in forestry school at UMass and taking a lot of wildlife classes. I think by that point, a lot of people, especially in the universities, began to reevaluate all those attitudes and policies and extermination campaigns. And I think there was a realization that 100 years ago, when wolves really were going after livestock, it was proper for ranchers to kill those wolves. But the situation has changed now thanks to restrictions on hunting now. In many areas of the West, there's more prey animals than what was there in the old days. So there are plenty of prey animals for wolves in much of the West right now. When they were declared to be an endangered species, the endangered species law also mandated that federal land managers out west try to see if there might be some areas where wolves could be restored. 200 to 300 left in that same area, the lower 48 states. So that's what we did to them. So I think it's only fair to try to make up for that and try to see if there are at least a few places where they can be restored, places where they used to live, where they were killed off, places where they could do well if they were brought back right now. And certainly Yellowstone is the prime area.
Okay, let's just take a little break, and then we'll be back. And I'll bring the of the War Against the Wolf, America's campaign to exterminate the wolf, and a ranger, and all of that kind of thing. And also, we'll get to Paul Safran in just a moment. Also, in the meantime, Joe has been hanging on for a long time and has a question. Joe's in Quincy.
I'm into the animal thing.
Yes.
I travel all over the United States.
Yeah, never mind what you did. What's your question, Joe?
The question is, I see over 50, 60 wolf cubs that are sold at auctions, and there's people out there raising them as house dogs. And ask him about his opinion about that.
Well, you ask him. You've just asked him that. Rick, what do you think?
Well, pretty much all my involvement has been with wild wolves. So I haven't really been too directly connected with captive-born wolves or wolf hybrids. I think maybe one thing I could say is that people really need to be very cautious about making a decision to acquire an animal like that.
Well, it's all done illegally, and I've been in the homes with some of them, and they're pussycats. They're beautiful. And there's nothing. I feel safer with them than I do with a dog. And a lot of people have a code. It's like an underground movement. The breed first, other people fearing second, and the buck comes third. And I could give you addresses where you can buy pure wolves. I can give you telephone numbers where you can buy pure wolves.
Anyway, we got the idea, Joe. Thank you very much for the question. Let's bring in Paul Safran also now. Paul is the founder and director of the North American Wolf Foundation. We just talked with a while back, and has a place up in Ipswich, Massachusetts called Wolf Hollow. Paul, meet Rick, and Rick, meet Paul. It's nice to bring you guys together.
Hey, Paul, how are you doing?
Oh, Rick, how are you?
Good, very good.
Great.
Okay, we're back to a subject that people don't really know very, very much about, but it's kind of intriguing, and I think a lot of people, when they see a wolf, think it's a dog anyway. And so I would assume that the dogs, even purebred dogs now, were they bred from wolves?
Yeah, that's certainly the prime theory. Some people are even going to the point where they're saying that the scientific name of the dog should be the same for the wild gray wolf, Canis lupus. I think what's exciting about this particular aspect is that for people that have never been lucky enough to be around wolves in the wild, if they've been around dogs, they already do have quite a bit of knowledge about wolf behavior. Certainly a family dog, its relationship to its master, to the other folks in the family, is very much similar to the way that a wild wolf would relate to the other members of its pack. So dogs and wolves have many, many things in common.
What are your comments about that, Paul? And what questions or comments would you like to make to Rick?
Well, I'd like to thank Rick for writing this book, A War Against the Wolf. We have that for sale here in our gift shop, and he definitely has spent a lot of time investigating what has happened to the wolf in the past, and I give him a great compliment for that.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it, eh? Okay.
Well, for right now, because
What did you think about that last caller, Joe, who says that he seems to indicate he'd rather deal with wolves than with dogs because he says they're gentler? That doesn't seem right to me, but maybe so. I don't know anything about wolves.
Well, it all depends on the person's knowledge and how to behave with a wolf, because you have to behave like a wolf to be able to get along with a wolf.
How is that? That's how do I behave like a wolf?
Well, you have to know what facial expressions mean to a wolf. And if you give the incorrect facial expressions, that means you can be giving them a challenge or threatening them.
Even that facial expression, the wolves can read your face?
Oh, definitely. Like, eyes are very important things. Wolves, when they look at each other, if they're staring at each other, one is staring at a lower rank wolf, that means it's telling that lower rank wolf that, you're misbehaving, I don't like what you're doing. And when they blink, that is a sign of friendship, like I do with my wolves here all the time. If one is looking me in the eyes, I look it back in the eyes, and I blink my eyes, which is letting them know that I'm giving them a friendly gesture, and also smiling. If you smile at a wolf and show your teeth, that is a threatening gesture. So when you smile, you just keep your lips tight and give a smile and blink your eyes, and this is a totally friendly gesture, and they accept that, and they will come up and sometimes jump right up in my face and lick me in the face and the nose. And I also give them a little lick back. That might sound kind of gross to people, but that's what I do, but it makes them happy, and I'm very tightly bonded with my wolves, and I have one wolf here. His name is Liko, which is a Greek name for wolf, and he stands almost 6'2", when he reaches up to take a vitamin out of my hands. So from the tip of his back feet to the tip of his nose, he's at least 6'2", and he weighs about 140 pounds. And this gets people very excited to see this happening, and I also give him vitamins out of my mouth. I take a vitamin, pet dad.
I think I'm going to be sick.
I'll take a pet dad vitamin and break it in half, and that ends up being about twice the size of a aspirin. And I will put this in my lips, and he will reach up and very gently put his paws on my shoulder and also take this vitamin out of my mouth very gently, so it kind of erases the knowledge that people have about wolves as far as being mean, aggressive, vicious animals, because they have the greatest control over their jaws. And I will also do things where we'll intimidate the wolf into grabbing my hand, but they have an inhibited bite when they are teaching. Wolves are great teachers, and this is how they teach their young. When the young are doing something wrong, they will come up and grab one of their young around the muzzle, but they will do it very gently, and it's their way of instructing and saying, hey, you're doing something wrong, so cut it out. So I do these things all the time, and it lets people know these wolves, any wolf is not a mean, aggressive, vicious animal, that they are teachers.
You must have felt a lot of grief reading Rick's book, Rick McIntyre's book, War Against the Wolf.
Oh yes,
because he's talking. You were talking, Rick, about the war against it. Way back in colonial times, and right through the time that the ranchers were out there on the range and the whole thing. And incidentally, and you also got some pictures that are kind of scary too, the kinds of things that they did with wolves and the result of all of that. But it just was considered kind of sport, and I guess it was like our war against the Indians. We just assumed this was the enemy, and it didn't really matter what you did to them because they had no feelings, and who cared?
Well, so one of the great ironies in the whole story, Norm, is the fact that the professional wolf killers that the federal government hired eventually turned out to have such a great deal of respect for the wolves that they were going after. Maybe just like the Army Scouts learned to respect the Indians as well. But that turned out to be one of the early turning points. One of the sections I have in the book is on the famous outlaw wolves and the government agents that were sent to kill them. And oftentimes those government agents ended up being converted by their experiences with the wolves. I think maybe the best wolf story that was ever written is the one I have in here from 100 years ago called Lobo. And it's about a man that is sent to New Mexico to kill the wolves there, but he becomes so impressed with their courage and bravery and their loyalty to each other that he spent the rest of his life trying to save wolves. And I found that very consistently with many of these people that were so closely involved with wolves in the wild. It really did turn them around. And I think ultimately what's most exciting about this story to me is that it is a story of optimism in the sense that it's true that our country did so many terrible things to the wolf. We did virtually exterminate it from the lower 48 states, but now things are different, and that very same animal that we tried so hard to kill off, we're trying very hard to bring back. And so it's a very optimistic story. I think it's a very exciting thing to see how history can change so much over our relationship between ourselves and an animal.
A lot of people are calling and would like, obviously, to talk to both of you guys. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, let's take a call from Jim, who's in Georgetown, not far from Ipswich, where your place is. Paul?
Yes.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, Norm. How you doing?
Good.
I just want to say I have read Rick's book, and it's an excellent book. It really disturbed me just to see what the history was with the wolves. And also I'd like to compliment Paul on his facility in Ipswich. I've been there a couple of times.
Thank you.
And it's very enlightening.
Now, what got you all interested in all of this, Jim?
I don't know. I think my dog, for one thing, I read quite a few books on dogs, and just kind of segued into wolves.
You kind of felt like that was kind of an ally as a result of liking dead dogs. Hey,
Well,
good.
It's true that all the dog behavior does mimic wolves rather
Yes.
closely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if any one of you two are aware of the movement up in Maine
Yes. Mm-hmm.
to get wolves restored up there in that zone.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And as you may know, there's been at least one, maybe more than one cases now where Canadian wolves have crossed the border and ended up in Maine. Unfortunately, the one that we know of for sure was shot for its trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exciting that the wolves on their own may end up coming back to Maine. A reintroduction may not be necessary.
As a matter of fact, you're talking about the nonprofit organizations involved with wolf issues, and you have the Maine Wolf Coalition up in Augusta.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's also, in the back of my book, I list a number of organizations, and let me turn to this. There's a group called Restore the North Woods that's based in Concord, and they've been working on wolf restoration issues in the Northeast quite a bit as well. There's a lot of interest in doing something in the Adirondacks, and so there's a lot of very exciting things happening. I think the best possible thing for all these movements has been the tremendous success that we've had in Yellowstone. And for your listeners that may not be familiar with that story, just very briefly, the wolves were originally killed off around 1926, and then some Canadian wolves were captured and set free just about a year ago in Yellowstone. And I had the privilege of being there last year and witnessing that and actually helping thousands of visitors see the wolves. And there's a very good chance that if some of your listeners, Norm, can come on out to Yellowstone this summer, they will be able to see wild wolves in Yellowstone Park. And so a lot of the things that Paul and I are talking about tonight, they can see for themselves in person in Yellowstone.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Norm. Thanks for the forum.
Thank you very much, Jim. Let's go to John in Michigan. Where in Michigan are you, John?
I'm in Hall, Michigan. I'm halfway between Detroit and Lansing.
Okay.
No, we had in case there's some guy here that sells these hybrids, you know.
This is what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I mean, the combination of dog and wolf.
I'm not against this. Well, I think this is a good deal to bring the wolf back, because they do need it, because the deer population is terrible down here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not against them for it, but I'm against this crossing with wild and tame animals. I mean, you get into the genetics there, and that's another field.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, there was a girl killed up in Flint about 5 years ago, a little girl. And the wolf was real tame, and what they had her for a couple of years, just one day it up and chewed her up.
Was that a hybrid animal?
Yeah, it was a hybrid.
Okay. One thing to stress, I'm not sure if anyone has said this earlier, that as far as we know, in all of North American history, there's never been a proven case of a healthy wild wolf killing a person. And I can draw on my own experience to add to that. In Alaska and in Montana, I've probably had 50 or 60 very close encounters with wild wolves within 10 or 15 feet, and I've certainly never had any feeling of threat or danger.
Well, it's the hybrids that I'm concerned about.
Yes,
They cross, so I'm not against the wolf. I think they should bring them back.
Mm-hmm. All right, great.
Okay?
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, John.
Thanks, it's a good program.
Thanks a lot, John. And Barbara in Brookline, you're on with Paul Safran, Rick McIntyre, and me, and nice to have you with us.
Good morning, Norm.
Hello.
I am in my mid-70s, and many years ago, my grandfather raised German Shepherd dogs, and he told me at one time that what he had to be careful of was if the dogs lapped water, there was enough shepherd in them. If they sucked water up, it was too much wolf, and they had to be destroyed. Now, I just wondered whether you guys could comment on that.
There's too much dog in it, actually.
I'm sorry?
There's too much dog in it. It's not the wolf.
It's the dog that's the problem, is what you're saying, Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, not the wolf. And why would you destroy a wolf for that?
Well, he was...
So, in other words, what you guys are saying, I think, Paul, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Paul and Rick. Does this sound like what we used to call an old wives' tale? Is this inaccurate?
Well, I know from my angle, and again, let me emphasize that I haven't had much direct experience with hybrids and other crosses. It's been pretty much all with wild wolves. I'm constantly amazed by why it is that wild wolves seem to hold human beings in such respect or fear, and that they really are no threat to us at all. On the other hand, there's the issue that every year in our country, pet dogs kill 20 people and attack roughly 500,000 folks. So there's certainly something about the domestication process where when you end up with something that's mostly dog, it's far more likely to attack than anything that's really a true wolf.
Well, could you just make any comment on whether wolves suck up water as opposed to lapping water?
The wild wolves that I've watched close enough sure look like they were lapping water to me.
Yes. I agree with you on that.
It may be, but my grandfather was from Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, your grandfather apparently didn't take a real close look, because neither Paul nor Rick agree with him.
Yep.
And Paul is just saying that what you're saying is not so at all.
They will bite. They will, it looks like they're biting the water. They don't sit and suck it up like huskies
all right,
do.
they're biting it rather than lapping it.
Well, no, no. What Paul is saying is that still lapping it. They lap it in a different kind of way. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
Yes, they take a mouthful of water. They'll put their muzzle into the water a couple inches and actually take a mouthful of water, lift their head up quick and swallow it, and then do it again.
Yeah. Thank you very much for calling, Barbara. It's kind of funny how these things stick with you. You hear something especially from a grandfather, so you expect it's going to be full of wisdom. And sometimes grandfathers have no idea what they're talking about.
Probably didn't see too good.
He may not have. And there's a woman in her mid-70s still believes that, you know, and she probably still believes it even after she heard you guys disclaim all of that.
Well, Norm, can I make a statement here?
Of course.
Actually, I don't dislike hybrids, but the fact is the hybrid is the most detrimental thing there is to the wolf in the wild, because any time that a hybrid hurts a person, the people blame it on the wolf part and the animal, when actually it's the dog part, because dogs don't have fear of people. So people put down the wolf in the wild when a hybrid does something to a person, like there was a young boy killed up in Vermont back a couple of years ago that was in a child daycare center, and the daycare center was next to a place where a man owned some hybrids, and one of the young boys left the daycare center and walked over to the cage where the house was next doors to him, and the hybrid that was in the cage was a female that just had a litter of puppies, and the gentleman that had the hybrids did not have a good enclosure. It was a very low fence. It was only 5 feet high, which a wolf can jump over actually a 10-foot fence if it doesn't have an overhang. So this hybrids, this hybrid saw the young boy coming over to its enclosure, and it got frightened because it thought the boy was going to maybe, threaten the puppies, so it jumped out of the enclosure and it killed this young boy. And all the news that was put out about it was basically detrimental to the wolf, when in fact, actually, it wouldn't have happened if it was a pure wolf.
I agree with Paul's statement. From my experience working with projects out west with wild wolves, it's those very things, the worst possible thing for those wolf restoration projects. People that are opposed to wolves will take something like that and use it for their own purposes to try to scuttle those wild wolf projects. I think the difficulty in the situation with the hybrids is that almost everyone that gets an animal like that does it for real good motives. And I think usually the motive is that they really admire and respect wild wolves, and they want something that maybe gets them close to what they feel a wild wolf is like. But there are very few people that maybe really understand what kind of a commitment is really required to take proper care of an animal like that.
Exactly.
And I think that's the real critical issue. A friend of mine in Montana does have a hybrid, and he spends every day probably 3 to 4 hours with that dog playing and running and doing everything. And because of that, the animal is very well adjusted, perfectly behaved. But I could sure see if my friend neglected the animal, just kept it chained up in the backyard, just like neglecting a child, and the wolf dog could really react inappropriately, and it could be in a violent way. So I think ultimately everything goes back to the ownership of the animal, and unfortunately a lot of the things I've seen personally and then stuff I've read about indicates that there aren't that many people that take proper care of the animal.
Okay, let's take. Good on. You both are agreeing on everything.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
And another true statement that goes today is that 90% of wolf dog hybrids are put to sleep before they're 2 years old.
I've heard that.
Oh.
And the reason of that is that because people that get them don't know really know what they're getting into.
Mm-hmm.
And when the wolf hybrid starts to get sexually mature, that's when they get to be very intense in their behavior, and that's the time when they start to get very feisty and aggressive, and that's when people might do something like slap the animal to make it stop this aggressive behavior, and the wolf hybrid will retaliate.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where, and this is something people won't put up with, and they'll have the animal put to sleep. I have had over 900 phone calls in 5.5 years' time from people that wanted to get rid of their wolf dog hybrid. Over 900 phone calls from all around the country.
Wow. Okay, let's take a call from Pauline, who's in the town of Westboro, Massachusetts, and who's been to your place there. Paul?
Yes.
Hi, Pauline.
Hi, Norm. Thank you. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Pauline. How are you?
I'm fine. How
Great.
are you?
Fine.
What a nice surprise to hear you on Norm's show tonight.
Well, I'm very happy to help the wolf, and this is the best way it can be done.
Well, I want to say, Norm, Paul is not telling you in detail of their commitment to this. Recently, his wife Joni told me that since they got the wolves, which was in 1990, Paul, was it? The babies? The first set?
Yes.
Since they've had them, they have only, one of them always has to be home. They've only been out of the house twice together, once for a son's graduation and once for a daughter's wedding.
Right. And somebody has to be here.
You know, I thank you, Paul, in the name of the wolves, because that's an incredible commitment.
Now that is what you call devotion. I would certainly agree with that.
And
maybe something.
I wonder if I have a question. Well, not a question, but I'd like Paul to tell you one thing. Then I have a question for Rick. Paul, I wonder if you've mentioned, or if I missed it, but if you could tell Norm and other people those two things, those main things that humans can learn from the wolves, that wolves do better than humans.
What do you mean as far as hunting animals?
Well, as far as taking care of their babies.
Oh, yes. Well, that's something that is very original for and the wolves will never hurt their young. And we prove this here all the time to people by bringing out food during the presentations. And when there are young wolves out here, up to about the age of 10 months old, that's when the rank order starts getting set. And the young wolves are always allowed to eat first. I have 17 wolves here, like I say, and 13 of them were born here. And people see that year after year, because I've had 4 litters born here. And when I bring the food out and I put it down on the ground in front of the observation area where people can see this, the young puppies will come up and start eating the food, and the alphas, which are the mother and father, will stay right there and make sure that nobody interrupts them, anybody else from the pack. And the mother and father will even wait sometimes till the puppy have had their fill, and then they'll go and eat first, and they eat in rank order after that. And people are totally amazed by this, because this is something you won't see in any other species.
What about the celibate subordinates?
Excuse me?
What about tell them about how the only pair that mates are the alpha pair.
Yes, the alpha pair are the leaders of the pack. And,
so in other words, also, you won't find husband and wife abuse. You won't have a parental abuse of children among wolves. That's only mostly in humans.
Yeah.
And Norm, one of the things that we've found with wild wolf packs that might interest you is that almost always it's the alpha female that's the true leader of the pack, that she's, in many cases, is more dominant than the alpha male, who may well be much larger than she is. One other thing that's always impressed me that kind of relates to some of Paul's comments is we've noticed that the non-breeding members of the pack that volunteer to care for the pups when the alphas are out hunting, essentially you could say the ones that run the daycare center, are given very high status by the alpha wolves for performing that job. In our society, usually daycare workers don't have very good pay or very good status, but in the wolf pack, it's just the opposite.
Very true. No.
Okay, did you just say you had another question you were going to ask, Pauline?
Well, I wanted to ask Rick to talk about one thing. If man doesn't think it owes the wolf a debt, he'll think so after Rick explains what denning is, when we were in the process of eliminating the wolves.
What denning was when they were killing them off?
Right.
Well, yes, it's a very distasteful thing to talk about, but I think sometimes to appreciate what wolves have been through and to give one more reason for trying to make up for that and bringing them back, This was especially done by the federal predator control agents back in the 20s and the 30s. The technique was in the spring, they'd train dogs to follow the scent trail of adult wolves back to the den. And then on arriving at the den with the shovel, they'd dig it out and kill all the pups along with the mother wolf. And the refinement on the technique to make sure that you killed every member of the wolf family would be to temporarily spare the life of one of the pups and chain it up to a nearby tree or a root, and then set up an ambush. And of course, that pup who would just witness the death of its mother and all of its siblings would be crying out and howling out. That sound would carry for miles. It would be heard by any surviving adult pack members, and they, really without checking for their own safety, would come rushing in to try to save the pup. And as they did that, one by one, they'd be shot and killed. And that was really the technique that the federal government used to exterminate the wolves in the West.
Yes, go ahead, Paul.
Norm?
Yes.
In this town of Ipswich, we have a gentleman here that back in 1939 was working for the federal government to kill wolves out in the West. And this involved dynamiting dens. They would find out where a wolf den was, and it had puppies in it, and they would basically, when the adults were out hunting, they would put dynamite in the dens. And when the wolves came back, the parents and the rest of the pack, and the parents went into the den, especially the mother usually, they would blow up the dens. And in one day, he said out there, they blew up and killed 225 wolves. Now, that isn't the cruelest thing.
Oh, some of the, anyway, Paul, and thank you. I'm going to move on to another question in a moment, but talking about cruel things, you mentioned in your book, Rick, about one device they had, and that was to put a wire, tighten a wolf's penis so that he could not urinate. Then they would kill the wolf, and then they would drain it of the urine and use the urine as a scent in order to attract other wolves so they could then kill them off too. Some of the methods were so painful reading your book.
Especially for my male readers. Yes, I came across that because I was finding all these pictures of these government predator control agents bringing live wolves back to their camp. And then, like in Paul's story, I found an old-timer, and he finally explained to me that was the reason why. They would keep these poor wolves chained up. They could drink all the water they wanted, but there actually was a tight wire around their penis so they couldn't urinate. They would wait until their bladders were just about to burst, and then they would kill the wolf. And male wolves, when they get the odor of some strange male's urine in their territory, they have to go over and investigate. They have to check it out. And so the trapper would put all the steel traps and then sprinkle the foreign urine around it, and that's how he would kill them.
Oh, that's so awful. Let's go to Bruce. I hate to even think of that. Bruce, I mean, not simply because I'm a male, but simply because that is so cruel. You can't... Anyway, and we talk about the wolf. Let's kill the wolves. They're so bad. And look what we do.
Yes.
Bruce, anyway, in Boston, you're on WBZ. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, I have a comment and something to ask Rick.
Yes.
First, the comment is, I think it's, kind of two-faced that we have this national basketball team that has their mascot being the wolf, and I mean, I'm sure this won't happen, but it seems like if they had any real concern from the mascot that they're using, they could use some of their funds to do something for the wolf.
Yes, that's a good suggestion. Yeah.
And I don't see why that hasn't been raised anywhere before, but I think it would be it's basically they have this ghost animal that we more or less wiped out, but they're using it on their on their team uniform.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe that's true of a whole lot of teams that use an animal as insignia, like the Boston Bruins. Maybe we ought to help the Bear.
Yeah.
And maybe the Detroit American League baseball team ought to help the Tigers and all the Lions for the National Football League. Anyway, thank you very, very much, Bruce. Let's go to Pat in the town of Plainville, Massachusetts. Hi, Pat, you're on WBZ.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm very interested in this because I certainly know where Ipswich is. I lived in Newbury for the first 21 years of my life. And we lived on a big farm, and there was farms all around and everything, but I never saw a herd of wolves around there. And yet my sister-in-law still lives there in Newbury, and she knows that there are wolves that live behind her house, and she hears them at night and so forth. Now, are they becoming popular in Newbury, too?
Now, are you saying that these would be wild animals, or are they pets that people have?
No, they're wild animals.
Okay. Well, my guess is that what may be there would be the eastern version of the coyote, and maybe I could defer to Paul on this since he would be more knowledgeable about what's happening now than I would be.
That's exactly right, Fred.
They wouldn't be wolves.
There's been no wolves in Massachusetts since
well, that's interesting. Well, I never saw a coyote either, as far as that goes.
There's coyotes in Massachusetts now.
The coyote has more of a yipping call, more of a high-pitched call than the real classic deep-throated wolf howl. Yes. So that's one way to try to tell the difference. But the eastern coyotes are much bigger than the ones that we have out west. Yeah. And so just to see one at a distance, it might be hard even for an expert to tell for sure. But Paul is correct. There haven't been real wild wolves in Massachusetts for probably well over 100 years.
Now, would the coyote bother the farmers' flocks and so forth?
Yes, certainly in the West, the number one predator on livestock would very much be coyotes, and that's why in Yellowstone we have a real fascinating situation. We have been lucky in that there's been a researcher that's been studying the coyote population there for 6 years, and he's predicting when the wolves are back at full strength in Yellowstone, that's going to cause the coyote population to drop as much as 70%.
Oh, yes.
Right. The theory is that when the wolves were all killed off, they had been the main natural population control over coyotes. Yeah. So when the wolves were killed off, that allowed the coyotes to skyrocket. And last, I guess it was July, I had this great observation in Yellowstone of a young wolf that caught a coyote, pinned him down, bit him, let him go, caught him again, pinned him again, and bit him. They kept on chasing until the point where the coyote was right at the edge of that wolf's territory. They both stopped and they looked at each other, and as soon as the coyote took the next step beyond the territory, the wolf made a U-turn and went home. That was his point, just to kick the coyote out of the area. And so there's a real fascinating relationship between the two animals.
Very true. A wolf will not tolerate coyotes in its territory because coyotes are a threat to young wolves.
I'm going to have to kind of bring this. This is a fascinating discussion. I'm so glad we got onto this, and I'm so glad that you, Rick McIntyre, and you, Paul Safran, came on with us and talked about this, and also Fred Keating was on with us earlier. And I think we have to do this again one other night because an awful lot of people want to talk to you both, and we've just run out of time, and I'm sorry about that.
I'd like to make one more statement.
Well, if you can do it in about 20 seconds or 15 seconds, Paul, I don't have much time.
I'd like all the people that are listening to know that the wolf is the greatest benefit to a healthy environment and is also very important to people's health, because if the wolf is present and you have a complete environment and you have other animals around, small predators that will feed off of rodents. And in the town of Ipswich
I'm sorry, I got to cut you off, Paul. We're all out of time now. Paul Safran, founder and director of the North American Wolf Foundation, Wolf Hollow in Ipswich, and Rick McIntyre, War Against Wolf, America's Campaign to Exterminate the Wolf. A fascinating book. I'm Norm Nathan. I'll see you toward the end of the week.
That episode was packed full of information. But seriously, we can learn a lot from the wolf. Thanks for stopping by, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share across all your favorite streaming services. Please consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. You can subscribe there and get access to some special content you won't find anyplace else. Thank you to all the generous patrons that have signed up. We are inching our way to being able to start donating to the Berklee College of Music's Norm Scholarship Fund. Closing the vault and leaving this world a little sillier than we found it. For Fred Keating, Loci Clan Wolf Refuge in Conway, New Hampshire. Paul and Joni Saffron in the North American Wolf Foundation and Wolf Hollow in Ipswich, Mass. Rick McIntyre, author of War Against the Wolf. Commitment and Devotion. Big Bend National Park. Yellowstone National Park. Purebred British Columbian Timberwolves. The Who, What, and Why, and Werewolves. Okay, I couldn't help myself. And the man who was always on the prowl for laughs, Norm Nathan. I'm Tony Nesbitt.